Welcome to our vibrant network of governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity leaders. We share cutting-edge insights, best practices, and innovative strategies to empower professionals in navigating the dynamic cyber threat landscape. Join Circolo de CISO to ignite resilience and data protection across industries.
Hello, viewers. Welcome back to another episode on privacy management framework or program. And today we're going to talk about data protection measures in a privacy program. Right? So we've talked a lot on the importance of a program. We've spoken about impact assessment, risk management, privacy management solutions, and how to manage the data. So these are conversations we had in the previous episodes, and today our conversation is going to center around data protection measures. And to have this conversation, I have with me here Divij Varma. Welcome back again.
Thank you.
So Divij, jumping straight in.
Data protection.
Data protection.
Okay.
What is it? So today we talk about privacy, right? Then we said data protection. People are confused.
Well, in a lot of practical scenarios that you would see, people interchange both these words a lot. Privacy, protection, and I essentially feel yes, both these things go hand in hand, because privacy is about a person's right to whether he what information he wants to share, he doesn't want to share, and then protection piece of it is the organization's responsibility to uh, be aligned with whatever an individual's preferences are with respect to privacy. So privacy and protection always go hand in hand. But if we just talk about data protection, uh, it's a vast topic. I don't know. It might require a series of its own, but I would just restrict myself to the basics that are there around a privacy program and the things that you need to consider. So these data protection measures that you would usually have in a program will be there to safeguard the personal data from unauthorized access, disclosure, maybe modification, or even destruction. And the controls can vary from uh, technical controls, there can be organizational or even legal controls to mitigate risk, or to in fact mitigate data breaches, or your data does not fall into wrong hands. So, to name a few, and I would start with maybe the first and foremost control that I say in the protection piece is around consent. So, you are collecting the data, but then have you obtained the correct consent that from the data subject, the permissions that yes, you can use his or her data, you can process his or her data, or you can transfer his or her data. So that another in itself is a type of control that is used for data protection. Then comes your usual encryption, masking, deletion, your access controls. Now, I don't think we need to delve deep into the encryption, masking, and deletion piece, because almost, I'm sure all of us know the importance of these technical controls that are there. One thing that I would say, although that is another basic access control, but that is something that is overlooked in a lot of organizations just being because it is one of the most basic things. Access control, yes, everybody knows that is required, and you need to have controls around the access, that who can see this data or who cannot see this particular data. But that's until unless you have covered it from a 360 degree. Okay, you are provisioning the access, but are your measures around deprovisioning strong? What happens in the case I was a part of a certain team? I got elevated and maybe moved teams, but I'm sure all of us have seen cases wherein the previous access might still be there. So that is nothing but increasing the exposure to data and essentially increasing the risk. So, although these measures are very easy and almost everybody knows them, but I would say they are easier said than done. Things like an encryption and all, yes, you might go ahead, buy yourself those licenses around encrypting everything. That's okay. That's okay. But then until unless you have essentially implemented and envisioned those roles that need to have access to a particular data, those access controls, I think you might end up into a non-effective implementation of, say, things as simple as an encryption. Yes, I have
So,
encrypted my data,
yeah.
but
So,
I
Divij,
haven't.
I'm just going to interrupt you and ask you a very pointed question about consent management.
Yep.
What is deemed to be a consent? When do you say that I, as a customer, have given consent? Or when can an organization assume that a customer has given consent? I'll give you an example. I was out shopping a little while ago, and this guy gave me a 1 inch by 2 inch piece of paper, name, email ID, mobile number. Sir, fill it in. I said, why do you need this information? And then he said, we have a raffle. So I said, what do you have on offer? So he listed down the items. I said, where is it written down saying that this is what is there in the raffle? And then he did this, right? And I also didn't want to push it because I was running into another appointment. But giving your data to somebody who is requested for that, would it be deemed as consent?
See, uh, with consent comes into the picture of an explicit and an implicit consent. So explicit consent is wherein, like this case, let's assume this is an organization which is having these raffles, and uh, they list out everything in their page, or maybe a web page wherein they are saying, okay, I'm taking your name, mobile number, email ID for XYZ purpose, which is obviously your raffle draw, like you mentioned. So that's wherein I am taking your data for. How will I be utilizing
That
it?
is only if it is listed somewhere, documented
Yes,
and
yes,
published. But if it
yes.
is not documented, if it is not published, it cannot be deemed as explicit consent. Am I right to say
Agreed.
that?
Agreed.
Yes.
So
Go ahead.
the organization or somebody who is requesting that data has to explicitly and transparently mention that why is he collecting this data? How will he using this data? Will there be I don't know, any transfers to it? Or uh, what happens after this intent has been met? What will happen to my data after the intent for which it was collected has been met? Then, with the collection of data comes the rights that I, as a data subject, I have my rights. If I have consented to this, then I have my rights to withdraw my consent as well. Okay, till yesterday, I was fine with you processing my data. Now I don't want you to process my data. So I have the legal right as per the privacy laws, wherein I can request, uh, or in fact, I can withdraw my consent. So you should have the provisions, you should have the uh, not exactly controls, but provisions within your organization, that what happens in such a case. If you should essentially stop processing my data, I can raise a
Okay.
deletion request.
Here's a question for
Yeah.
you, right? So I
Hmm.
withdraw my consent.
Hmm.
Do I assume that you will delete my data, or do I assume that you will still keep my data, but you will not use it for processing?
Okay. So now it's not as simple that I come to you and I say, sir, please delete my data, and you just delete it, because there are other legal compliance and all other aspects that you need to see. Uh, let's take an example of a customer. A customer goes to one of those telecom authority, I'm saying telecom authorities, and says that, delete the details of my national identifiers that you would have collected while giving me a collection. No, I can't do that, because I am legally bound with, say, the telecom regulatory authority, that I need to maintain this data, that a particular number that I allocated to Divij Verma, what was the identity details, and maybe there is a clause that I need to maintain that data for 10, 20, I don't know, X number of years. So even if Divij goes to that data collector, or the telecom company, and ask that, no, I am not dealing with you, you just delete my data, that particular service provider will have to look into the legal obligations, the compliance requirements as well, because before he or she can fulfill my request. So it's not that straightforward. I wake up one day, I say, no, just stop processing my data, or delete my data, or all these things, because there are a lot of other things that you need to consider while fulfilling any request that comes under the data subject rights.
So Divij, I would like to summarize this for our viewers. So please understand what it means by consent, right? So that's a point which we would like you to take away and study. What are you collecting the data for? How are you going to use it? And if the customer comes back or the data subject comes back and says, do not process my data, what processes or mechanisms do you have in play to ensure that you are able to adhere to his or oblige to his request? So the other two takeaways which I have from Divij is user lifecycle management and also data lifecycle management. These are two elements. So when we look at the data lifecycle management, we look at how the data gets created, where it is stored, how it is used, when will you archive, and when will you purge. So that is data lifecycle management. And when you look at the user lifecycle management, from the time the user is onboarded to the organization till the time he departs or exits, you need to regulate his or her access to the data. So the mantra or the principles on which access is usually granted is least privilege and need to know and need to do basis. But traditionally, which we have seen, most organizations do not practice least privilege.
Yep.
Not only
Yep.
for end users, even at an administrator level, everybody in the IT department may have the same level of access that of a global administrator.
Totally
So,
agree.
so when there is a breach of this identity, the attacker will have access to all the privileges that the particular identity has. So you do not have the layers of defense built in. So that's the cost of concern. So you need to start reviewing your users as to which of the users have access to the data and how and what they do with that data. And the other one, which briefly mentioned about encryption. So I just want to give you context. Understand that the requirement for confidentiality. So you can establish confidentiality based on a need to know, need to do principle. But if you want to ensure unauthorized access or unauthorized disclosure of information or unintentional disclosure of information, you need to look at anonymization, pseudonymization, and encryption. Right. So we are not going to be talking about the details or definition of these terms, but if you want to establish confidentiality, these are different mechanisms you can establish. And likewise, Divij also mentioned that it is important to ensure integrity of the data, right? So that there are no unauthorized, unintentional changes to your data. So when you look at the data privacy management program, and especially when you do the impact, these are elements you need to consider. And then when you identify these elements, you need to also build in the necessary security controls to mitigate or minimize that threat or the risk. Right. So with that note, Divij, thank you so much for taking time to
Thank you.
have this conversation today. And I look forward to our final episode, which we will be discussing tomorrow, which is going to be on the humans,
Yes.
right? The most important element in this data privacy program. So viewers, please look out for our next episode, which will be on human side of data privacy and the importance of training and why people need to be trained. Thank you so much.
Thank you.